What if a plane shot down in World War II never really crashed? What if its engines still hum above the treetops, carrying souls that never made a home? Tonight, we uncover one of the most chilling mysteries in war history, where echoes of the past refuse to be silenced, and the dead might still be flying. Whispers over the village. The village of Oosterveld, nestled quietly near the Dutch-German border, had always lived in the shadow of war. During the chaos of the 1940s, it had seen planes soar and bombs fall. But decades later, when peace had long settled, something strange began to stir again. It started as a whisper, just a few old farmers at first, speaking in hushed tones at the local pub. They claimed to hear a deep, rhythmic humming at night. Not every night, but often enough to unsettle them. The hum wasn't mechanical, not like a modern drone or helicopter. No, it was older, heavier, slower, like a great metal beast flying low in the fog. One farmer, Peter Van Houten, a man in his 80s with sharp ears and a sharper memory, swore he recognized the sound. "It's AB-17, he told anyone who would listen. That deep purring growl. I heard it when I was a boy, hiding under the table as the sky roared above us." Most dismissed it as age, perhaps nostalgia, or just the creaks of a tired mind. But then others began to notice it too. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the humming would begin, faint at first, almost like a trick of the wind. Then it would rise, circling slowly above the woods to the north. No lights, no visual, just the sound, as if the clouds themselves were groaning under the weight of something massive and unseen. The town's only police officer, Sergeant Willems, received a handful of calls. Unexplained aircraft noise, they said. Each time, he'd check the airspace records. No flights logged, no military activity, and no blips on radar. He even contacted air traffic control in Arnhem, but they confirmed nothing had flown over Oosterveld at those hours. Curiosity turned to concern when several children reported hearing radio static coming from the sky. One young girl described a voice repeating numbers, like an old coded broadcast. Delta, 5, Bravo, repeat, drop point not clear. Her parents thought she was imitating some war movie, until a neighbor heard the exact same transmission while walking her dog. The town was changing. Locals began locking their windows at night. Some claimed to hear metal clanking, like landing gear trying to descend. Others swore they saw a flicker of green light, the kind once used on World War II bombers, shimmering for just a second before disappearing behind clouds. The most unnerving report came from an elderly widow, Marique, who lived at the edge of the forest. She said the sound stopped directly above her home one night, and when she looked outside, the entire yard was bathed in a faint red glow, like a cockpit under emergency lighting. No one believed her at first. Not until the local news drone, doing a report on wind turbines, caught a strange thermal anomaly over that very forest, hotter than any known source, and moving at an impossible angle. Locals began calling it the Phantom Bomber. Children drew pictures of planes with ghostly trails behind them. Tourists began visiting, curious about the legends. A few even tried to stay overnight near the forest to hear it for themselves. And sure enough, many of them did. In a town that had long tried to forget the horrors of war, it now seemed that war had never truly left. Not in spirit, not in sky, not in sound. The crash of 1944, the strange sounds that haunt the skies above Oosterveld today, trace their origins back to one dark afternoon in September 1944, a time when the sky over Europe was a battlefield, and hope was stitched into the wings of steel giants. It was around midday when the residents of Oosterveld first looked up and saw the black dots crossing the sky. They were part of the 8th Air Force, flying in formation toward German industrial targets deep behind enemy lines. Among them was AB-17 Flying Fortress, designated Shadow of Valor. She was a veteran bomber, scarred by missions over Berlin, Cologne, and Hamburg. Her crew of 10 men had seen fire and fury, yet always returned. But that day, their luck ran out. Eyewitnesses recall the sky suddenly erupting in flame, A formation of German Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters swooped down like falcons. The bomber held its course, machine guns blazing, but soon it became clear Shadow of Valor was in trouble. A direct hit tore into the port wing. Smoke poured from the engines. Parts of the fuselage ripped open, flak shrapnel ripping through the cabin. Local children watched in terror as the massive aircraft began to dip lower, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. Then came the most chilling sound, a high-pitched scream, not from the engines, but something else, something human. Or not. Villagers said the plane didn't crash immediately. Instead, it circled once, low and slow, almost as if trying to land. But there was nowhere safe to go, just thick woods and open fields. And then, in a final groan of twisted metal and thunder, the flying fortress vanished into the forest just north of the village. The explosion shook the earth. Black smoke rose like a pillar into the sky. Trees caught fire. Birds fled in great flocks. Silence followed, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the kind of silence that waits, holding its breath. For hours, no one dared go near the site. The Germans were still close. Patrols roamed the area. But as night fell, a small group of villagers, brave and desperate to help, slipped through the trees. They found a scene of devastation. The wreckage of the B-17 was scattered like broken bones across the forest floor. Parts of the tail had lodged into a tree. One wing was half buried in the soil. Fire still smoldered. The smell of oil and smoke clung to the air. But amidst the destruction, they found life. 3 crew members had miraculously survived, bruised, bleeding, but breathing. A 4th was found, alive but barely conscious. He would die later that night, whispering a single word repeatedly. Lights, they came back. The lights. The villagers took the survivors in, hiding them in cellars, barns, and even a church crypt. It was dangerous. Harboring Allied soldiers could mean death. But the people of Osterfeld didn't hesitate. They never forgot what they saw at the crash site. Some claimed they heard whispers in the trees, long after the flames had died. One man said he saw a figure in a flight suit, standing beside the wreck, unmoving, face hidden by shadow. But when he called out, the figure vanished. Others insisted they heard engine noise, hours after the plane was already on the ground. And strangest of all, the cockpit. Though the entire nose section had been obliterated, one villager, a carpenter named Bram, claimed the cockpit looked clean, almost untouched, as if someone had wiped it down, even though it was in the heart of the crash. He swore he saw fresh boot prints leading away from it, too many for the surviving crew, too many for the living. To this day, the forest holds its secrets. The wreckage was mostly recovered after the war, but some parts were never found, parts the trees wouldn't give back. And as the years passed, the villagers wondered, did all the souls aboard that flight ever leave? Or did some remain behind? The survivors' haunting memories. The crash of Shadow of Valor should have marked the end of its story. A doomed mission, a final descent into a forest far from home. But for those who survived, the fall was only the beginning. 3 crewmen lived through the crash. Lieutenant Jack Morgan, the navigator, Staff Sergeant Eli Brenner, the radio operator, and Corporal Dean Holloway, a young tail gunner just 19 years old. Broken and bleeding, they were dragged from the wreckage by villagers who risked everything to save them. They were hidden in the cellar of an old windmill where time stood still. German patrols combed the area for weeks. The men were silent, cooperative, but deeply disturbed, not just by the trauma of war or the pain of their wounds. It was something else, something none of them could explain. Jack Morgan began to write. With a trembling hand and what little light filtered through the cellar grates, he filled a small leather-bound notebook with his memories of that day and what he had seen just before the crash. He described how, moments after the bomber took a direct hit, the crew prepared for the worst. Fire in the engines, controls unresponsive, alarms wailing. And then silence. Not inside the plane, but outside. He looked out the cockpit window and saw something impossible. A light, hovering above the trees ahead of them. Not fire, not flak, not stars. A a brilliant white-blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. And beside it, for just a second, a shadow in the sky. Not a plane, not a bird. Something human-shaped, but far too large, drifting silently beside the bomber as it fell. He called out to the crew, but no one answered. That was the second strange thing. The intercom had gone silent. Yet when he turned in his seat, he saw them. All 10 men, sitting upright at their stations, staring blankly ahead. Silent. Still. Almost like statues. He reached for the pilot, Captain Anders, but the man didn't respond. His eyes were open, fixed forward, his hands on the controls. But he wasn't flying the plane anymore. And then suddenly, the world returned. The screams, the shaking, the fire. Jack blacked out. When he awoke, he was lying in the mud, pulled free by a Dutch farmer. Anders was gone. Most of the crew was gone. Only Eli and Dean had also made it out alive. In the days that followed, the 3 survivors spoke quietly in the cellar, trying to piece it together. Eli swore he'd heard Morse code signals in his headset just before the crash. Messages in a language he didn't understand, but with his name embedded in the rhythm. Dean said he had seen a woman's face in the glass of his tail turret just before impact. A face he didn't recognize, but that looked calm, almost peaceful. When asked about these memories after the war, none of them ever recanted. If anything, the memories became clearer, more vivid with time. Jack eventually returned to the United States. He married, had children, but never flew again. He kept his journal locked in a metal box in the attic. Until one night, years later, his wife found him standing in the yard, staring up at the stars. He whispered to her, they never left the plane. She didn't understand at the time. Not until Jack passed away in 1971. Not until she opened the box and read the pages. There, in fading ink, Jack had written one final line, beneath a sketch of the B-17 and that same strange light he saw in the sky. Some were saved. Some never landed. The Vanishing War Diary. For years, Jack Morgan's journal remained a personal relic of survival. Kept out of sight, locked in a box, buried beneath everyday life. It was a window into the most harrowing moment of his youth and a mystery he never solved. After Jack's death in 1971, the journal was passed to his widow. Curious but respectful, she donated it to a military history museum in Utrecht, believing it could serve as a first-hand account of what her husband endured. The curators were fascinated, not just by the crash details, but by the unusual final entries. The journal spoke of impossible sights, a glowing figure in the sky, a frozen cockpit, and crewmen behaving like they were no longer themselves. There were even strange sketches, symbols, repeating patterns, and something Jack called the Watcher in the clouds. It was clear this wasn't just a flight log. It was a document of something far stranger. But within 6 months of its arrival at the museum, the diary vanished. No record of theft, no break-in, just gone. Security footage from that week showed nothing. Museum staff combed through inventories and storage units. Nothing turned up. It was as if the journal had never been there. Officially, it was declared misplaced due to cataloging error. Unofficially, many suspected it had been stolen by a private collector or deliberately removed by someone who didn't want its contents made public. For decades, the diary became a quiet legend among military archivists and paranormal historians. A holy grail of sorts, but no one could find it. That was until last year. In 2023, a Dutch historian named Eva de Vries came across a private collection being auctioned from the estate of a retired American intelligence officer. Among the old medals, maps, and battlefield letters was a partial photocopy of Jack Morgan's journal. It wasn't complete, only the last 15 pages, but they were enough to reignite the mystery. The entries began normally, descriptions of the crew, flight plans, mission target. But halfway through, Jack's tone shifted. The writing became erratic, hurried. He spoke of hearing voices on the intercom, but not in English, not German, not any language he knew. He described waking from a brief blackout in mid-flight and seeing that the sky outside had turned completely black, even though it was noon. The clouds were gone, the sun was gone, and the bomber floated in a sea of dark silence. He wrote, We're in the air, but nothing moves. The crew is still, like puppets with their strings cut. I can feel something outside the skin of the plane. Watching, waiting. One entry, dated the day of the crash. Simply read. Something else is flying this plane now. And then, on the very last page, Jack included a note that felt less like a record and more like a warning. If you ever hear the hum, don't look up. Don't answer the call. It's not over. We left something behind up there. Along with this note was a drawing, a silhouette of the B-17, and beneath it, in the clouds, dozens of faces peering upward with hollow eyes. Some looked like men, others didn't. Eva shared this discovery with researchers at university in Leiden. The pages were authenticated. The handwriting matched. Ink tests confirmed the paper's age. But days later, before a full digital archive could be created, the photocopy vanished too. Eva's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen except her files related to the journal. No fingerprints. No forced entry. Just gone again. What is it about this journal that refuses to stay in the world? Why do its pages disappear again and again? Some believe Jack was losing his mind. Others think he saw something no man was meant to witness. But a growing number of people, those who've heard the hum in the forest, seen the glow above the trees, or caught whispers on dead radios, think otherwise. They think the journal is being taken back, not by men, but by the crew who never truly left. Ghost hunters capture the impossible. Over the years, Osterfeld's legends never fully faded. The stories of a phantom bomber circling the skies at night, of whispers in the trees and red glows in the mist. They became part of the village's folklore, but few outside the region took it seriously. That changed in 2018, when a group of paranormal investigators from Rotterdam set their sights on the Osterfeld forest. They called themselves the Night Signal, a small team of ex-military, sound engineers, and historical researchers who specialized in hunting down wartime hauntings across Europe. They had heard rumors of a shadow of valor, and of a forest where sound itself seemed to warp after midnight. What they found would turn legend into evidence. The team arrived in early October, just as the fogs returned to the valley. They set up base in an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of the woods, bringing high-end equipment, thermal cameras, EMF readers, wideband radio receivers, and parabolic microphones. They weren't chasing shadows, they wanted proof. For 3 nights, they recorded nothing but natural sounds, owls, wind through trees, the occasional passing car. But on the 4th night, at 3:17 a.m., everything changed. The air pressure dropped. The forest went silent. Then came the hum. It wasn't subtle. It rose slowly, like an old engine coughing to life. But there was no source, no visible aircraft. The sound seemed to move above them, circling in a wide arc. The team scrambled to calibrate their microphones, capturing multi-directional audio of a low-frequency rumble matching the engine of a World War II-era B-17. But that wasn't all. One of their parabolic microphones, pointed at the treetops, picked up radio static, at first indecipherable. Then a voice. Male. American. Faint, but unmistakable. The same voice repeated a message over and over. Eagle 1 to command. Bomb doors stuck. Request manual override. Over. The voice cut in and out like a broken loop. Behind it, the unmistakable sound of metal rattling and distant yelling, as if from a battle long past. And then silence. The signal vanished as quickly as it came, shaken but determined. The team returned to the farmhouse to review the recordings. The spectrogram of the engine hum showed something eerie, a repeating pattern, almost musical in tone. Some believed it resembled Morse code. Others thought it was just the pattern of the engine cycling. But the last 3 pulses matched Jack Morgan's journal entry from 1944. The same rhythm, he said, haunted the intercom before their crash. Even more disturbing was the thermal footage. One of the cameras, aimed toward the tree line, picked up a sudden spike in heat, an outline in the sky. Not a bird, not a drone. The silhouette of a massive aircraft, briefly visible through infrared before fading into the fog. Its wingspan matched that of a B-17. The team uploaded part of their findings to the internet. The footage spread quickly through European paranormal circles. Some skeptics called it a hoax, but audio engineers verified the recordings. They hadn't been altered. The thermal readings were confirmed authentic. Then, the footage was taken down. Copyright complaints. Privacy issues. Some claims came from a U.S. military server. The team's leader, BAS Vermeer, claimed they were visited by two men in dark civilian suits 2 weeks after the release. He said they weren't threatening, but they strongly advised him to leave wartime matters to the dead. And so, the Night Signal disbanded quietly. Most of the team moved on to other things. But BAS? He never forgot that night. He still swears that something flew overhead, something not of this world, but still bound to it. He keeps a small black box locked in his home, a backup drive containing everything they recorded that night. He says he'll never share it again, but sometimes he plays it back, just to remember. And when he hears the hum return, he says he doesn't feel fear. He feels sorrow, as if the bomber is still out there, circling the sky, looking for a landing strip that doesn't exist. Scorch marks in the fields. Long after the flames of war had gone out, the earth in Osterfeld still carried scars. But some wounds didn't belong to history or nature. The first burned circle appeared in 1994. A farmer named Willem Bakker was checking his wheat field just after sunrise. At the northern edge, near the border of the forest, he found a perfect ring of scorched soil, nearly 20 meters across. The grass inside was withered and blackened. No footprints, no tire marks, no sign of fire or chemicals. Just a wide, clean burn, like something massive had hovered just above the ground, searing it from the air. At first, it was dismissed as a prank or a freak lightning strike. But then, the same circle returned the next year, on the exact same date. And again, the year after that. Always in early September, always in the same spot. The crops would die in the circle. Nothing would grow there until late spring. Experts from Wageningen University took samples. The soil wasn't contaminated. No radiation, no fuel residue, no trace of herbicides. It's as if the earth was cooked from above, one soil technician noted. By 2002, there were 3 more scorch rings, all forming a rough triangle near the old crash site of Shadow of Valor. Locals began to take notice. The village council tried to keep it quiet, worried it would attract conspiracy theorists or supernatural tourism. But by then, the damage was undeniable. Flocks of birds began avoiding the area altogether. Migratory paths shifted slightly. One drone pilot reported that every time he flew over the largest burned circle, his signal cut out for exactly 13 seconds. Always 13. And then came the sightings. Multiple villagers over several years claimed to see a red glow in the fields at night, like the dying ember of an old aircraft engine, pulsing softly in the dark. One old man said he saw landing lights moving silently over the field before vanishing into thin air. More disturbing still were the sounds. Field workers began reporting the distant thump of rotating propellers, always around 3 a.m. The hum wasn't constant. It rose and fell like an aircraft making passes above, but there was nothing in the sky. Even when radar-equipped police drones were sent up, they captured no air traffic, no movement. And yet, when one drone malfunctioned and crash-landed in the center of a burned ring, its onboard microphone recorded a chilling moment just before impact. A faint voice, barely audible. American accented, whispering, "Bomb doors open. We're going in." The audio was uploaded by an anonymous user to a Dutch paranormal forum. The file only stayed online for a few days before being deleted, but not before dozens heard it. The most recent burn appeared in 2020, just before the pandemic silenced the world. A group of hikers discovered it, fresh and perfectly symmetrical. And for the first time, they found something inside, a small piece of twisted metal, scorched and partially buried. It was shaped like part of a wing strut, no larger than a hand. On one side, nearly unreadable, were stamped the faded letters. USAF 81284. Military records linked that number to AB-17 bomber, to Shadow of Valor. How could a part of the wreckage, which was supposedly recovered in 1945, reappear in 2020, half melted and sitting in a spot where no wreckage had ever been before. Many now believe these marks are not signs of haunting, but landings. That somehow, Shadow of Valor returns to the Earth again and again, not in the form of wreckage, but as something else. A spectral echo of the bomber, repeating its last descent, trying to finish a mission long ended. The Earth beneath remembers, and each year, it records the passage of something we cannot see, but can no longer deny. A German soldier's secret note. History, they say, is written by the victors. But sometimes it's the hidden voices, the ones lost in footnotes and forgotten journals, that tell the most unsettling truths. In 2021, a dusty attic in Dusseldorf was being cleared out after the death of a reclusive elderly man. Among the yellowed papers and rusting relics, the estate agent discovered a weathered field journal wrapped in a Nazi-era army tunic. The name scrawled on the inside cover, Feldwebel Ernst Reiner, a German anti-aircraft gunner stationed near the Dutch border in 1944. At first, the journal was passed off as standard wartime memoir, a log of coordinates, enemy movements, supply reports. But then came the final section, dated September 8, 1944. The night Shadow of Valor was shot down. It began with a simple entry. We saw it again. According to Reiner, the German crew manning the flak battery north of Osterfeld had experienced something unusual the week prior. Each night, around the same hour, they would hear a faint humming in the sky, but no planes would appear. They called it Das Schattenflugzeug, the shadow plane. Reiner's tone shifted as the entries progressed. The experienced gunner, who had survived both the Eastern Front and Allied bombing campaigns, began expressing a kind of irrational dread. He wrote of dreams shared by multiple soldiers, of falling endlessly through thick clouds and voices calling them by name from inside the wind. And then came the night Shadow of Valor, flew overhead. Reiner describes the scene vividly. 10 of them in tight formation. American bombers. The sky glowed orange behind them. We opened fire. One was hit. The rest turned. One did not. That last bomber, he claimed, flew lower and slower than the rest. Its tail was already smoking. But as it descended, Reiner saw something that made him freeze at his post. A massive shadow following the bomber, not cast by it, but flying just beneath it. Humanoid, but too large to be real. It drifted silently just beneath the fuselage, keeping pace with the dying plane. And then it looked at him. He wrote, "It had no eyes, but I felt its gaze. It was not death. It was older than death. I dropped my weapon. I wept. I cannot explain why." Later that night, as the crew returned to their camp, Reiner wrote of hearing hymns, soft choral singing, coming from the sky. Not German, not English, just voices in harmony, as if a choir were flying overhead. The next day, Reiner requested to be transferred. His commanding officer refused. 3 days later, he vanished without a trace. The journal ends abruptly with one final note scribbled at the bottom of a page. Shaky handwriting, smeared ink. They do not crash. They descend. The plane falls, but they do not. They return every night, looking for something we stole. Who they were, Reiner never explained. The journal now rests in a private collection in Cologne. Its authenticity has been confirmed by multiple historians, though many refuse to comment on its contents publicly. Some researchers suggest Reiner was suffering from battle fatigue, a mental breakdown under the pressures of war. Others believe he may have witnessed something no soldier should ever see. Not just the crash of a bomber, but the passage of something unworldly tied to that doomed aircraft. What makes his account so compelling is how closely it matches Jack Morgan's lost journal. Two men, from opposing sides of a brutal war, both describing a shadow that followed the bomber, both mentioning voices in the air, both vanishing, one into history, the other into mystery. Perhaps the most chilling part? Reiner wasn't stationed near the bomber's final crash site. He was positioned miles away due west. Whatever he saw wasn't tied to the crash. It was following the plane, and maybe it still is. The night of the whirling fog. They came to see the fog, In late summer 2022, a group of Dutch and Belgian hikers, young, curious, and armed with smartphones, set up camp near the edge of the Oosterveld forest. They'd read the forums, watched the viral clips, and laughed at the ghost stories. They didn't believe a word of it, but they were interested in the fog, a strange weather phenomenon that seemed to roll through the region every September, always around the anniversary of the Shadow of Valor's crash. Locals claimed it was unlike any other mist, thicker, colder, and eerily quiet. Some said the fog brought something with it. Others said the fog was the thing itself. The hikers arrived on the 7th of September and set up their tents near the tree lane. The first day passed without incident, just bird songs, warm breeze, and light conversation. But around 3 a.m., everything changed. It began with a breeze that suddenly died, then a chill, and then fog, dense and low, rolling in fast over the open fields like a wave. One of the hikers, a woman named Laura, woke first. She would later say it was the silence that stirred her, an unnatural, dead silence. Not a single cricket, owl, or rustling branch. She stepped out of her tent and called to the others. As they gathered, flashlights in hand, the fog swirled around them, not drifting, but moving, as if being pushed by invisible hands. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. And then came the sound, that deep, distant hum, faint at first, but growing, mechanical, rhythmic. It pulsed through the mist, not like a modern jet, but like an old bomber engine, turning in sync. One of the hikers pulled out their phone and started recording. And that's when they saw it. Above the trees, just on the edge of visibility, the fog began to whirl in a spiral, slow, deliberate, and massive. Inside the swirling column, they saw flashes, not lightning, but lights, pale green and red, flickering like navigation beacons from a plane lost long ago. A figure in the back gasped. Someone whispered, "Are those wings?" Through the haze, something vast loomed. A ghostly outline, like the ribs of an aircraft, suspended in the mist. No sound of wind, no rotor blades, just a hum. It moved overhead, slow as a funeral procession, and then dipped lower. One hiker fell to their knees, screaming. Another backed away and vanished into the fog, disoriented. Laura kept filming, but her phone screen flickered with interference, numbers scrolling across, like coordinates or code. Her flashlight shorted out. Then came the radio voices. Faint, rapid, American. Eagle 1, report, pilot down, evasive, do not bail, repeat, do not. The voices grew louder, panicked, but overlapped and looped. The hikers clutched their ears. One of them swore he could hear his own name being whispered. And just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The fog collapsed in on itself, folding inward and vanishing like breath on a mirror. The trees reappeared. The night noises returned. The hum was gone. The next morning, the hikers were found by a local farmer. They were pale, shivering, and deeply shaken. One had wandered over 3 kilometers in the wrong direction. Another refused to speak for days. Laura uploaded part of the footage before her phone died completely. The file showed no clear aircraft, but the swirling fog and lights were visible, along with a low-frequency engine sound, matching previous recordings from the night signal team. But the most disturbing part? In the final frames, just before the file cut to black, a single red light flashes through the fog, and beneath it, a face staring directly at the camera. Not a crewman, not human, something older, worn, watching. The clip spread across Europe's paranormal communities. It was quickly flagged and removed from several platforms. But by then, it was too late. The legend had evolved. The Shadow of Valor wasn't just a ghost plane anymore. It was something alive in the fog, something returning each year to the place it fell, or maybe to the mission it never completed, the crew that never landed. In every war story, there's a beginning, a battle, and an end. But for the crew of the Shadow of Valor, there may never have been an ending at all. As the legends around the Oosterveld crash grew, and the sightings became more frequent, a disturbing theory began to take shape. Not among conspiracy theorists or ghost hunters, but among historians, military archivists, and even pilots who had studied the case. The theory was simple but terrifying. The crew never left the plane. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. Eyewitnesses from a night of the 1944 crash claimed only 3 men crawled from the burning wreckage. Records confirm that 6 were declared dead at the site. 1 was never found at all. Yet, there were discrepancies. Local villagers who arrived just after the crash reported seeing shadows moving inside the fuselage, long after it should have been uninhabitable. A young woman, just 14 at the time, said she saw a man in uniform standing by the wreck, silently watching, even as flames consumed the cockpit. His eyes were glowing, she swore. Not bright, but dull, like embers that wouldn't die. At first, these claims are dismissed as trauma or the tricks of smoke and fire. But as the years went on, something far stranger began to emerge: repetitions. In separate decades, on opposite sides of the forest, unrelated witnesses described the same man, a tall figure in a torn bomber jacket, standing beneath the trees, helmet half-burnt, oxygen mask hanging from his neck. One man encountered him during a storm in 1979. He said the figure approached from the mist, stopped, and whispered, "We didn't land. We're still flying." In 1998, a train operator claimed to see an entire crew marching silently through the fields at dawn. 10 shadows moving in perfect formation, passing directly through the hedgerow and vanishing into the morning fog. And in 2010, a drone captured a photo of the old crash site. At first glance, it was just trees and moss. But when enhanced, 10 faint silhouettes appeared in the shadows, all standing in a circle, as if waiting for something. The legend now has a name whispered in the village: the bemanning die nooit landde, the crew that never landed. People believe Shadow of Valor never truly fell, that her mission was interrupted, not ended, and that her crew, bound to their plane by fear, duty, or something older and darker, are still out there, circling above the clouds, locked in a loop of time and memory. Not ghosts exactly, not alive either, something in between. One theory suggests that the trauma of their final moments fractured more than flesh. It tore open time itself, leaving them trapped, still trying to complete an impossible task, dropping bombs on targets that no longer exist, calling commands into radios no one hears. Others think they're being kept, tethered to the earth by the very forest where they fell, by the soil, by the wreckage, by the silence that followed their last breath. But one thing is clear: they're not at rest, and they do not want to be forgotten. At night, when the fog rolls over Osterfeld and the hum begins again, people stop what they're doing. Some turn off their lights. Others say a quiet prayer, not in fear, but in respect. Because out there, above the trees, a battered B-17 may still be flying its final mission. And its crew? They may be watching, listening, waiting for someone to guide them home. The final message: some stories don't end in screams or fire. Some end in silence, with the wind brushing through the trees and a single, forgotten voice whispering from the past. In the autumn of 2023, while restoring an overgrown section of the Osterfeld forest for a local nature trail, a group of volunteers stumbled across something buried beneath a fallen oak. It was metal, warped, scorched, and barely recognizable. But once unearthed, it was clear what it was: a piece of the fuselage, roughly the size of a small door panel. The color was faded olive green. The edges had been torn by fire. But what made this piece different was the engraving. Scratched into the surface, faint but unmistakable, were 10 names: the crew of the Shadow of Valor. And beneath the final name, carved with more care than the others, were 4 words: "We fly together forever." No serial numbers, no rank, no slogans, just that. News spread quickly. The fragment was authenticated, confirmed to match the materials and construction of B-17 bombers. But there was no record of this part ever being recovered or cataloged during the post-war salvage. In fact, according to U.S. Army Air Force's documentation, the entire section it belonged to was obliterated in the crash. And yet, there it was. The villagers of Osterfeld decided to act. With funding from local historians and quiet support from the Royal Netherlands Air Force, They created a small memorial on the edge of the forest. Not a grand monument, but a simple stone circle surrounding the piece of metal, now polished and protected beneath glass. The memorial is unmarked by nation or politics. It bears no rank or ribbon, only the phrase, "We fly together forever." Since the monument was placed, something strange has happened. The night hum, that deep, ghostly sound that once haunted the skies, has grown quieter. Still there, but distant, like a plane flying higher now, further away. Locals say they haven't heard the same close, circling noise in nearly a year. Some believe the crew has finally been recognized, honored, seen. And in being seen, perhaps they've found some small piece of peace. But there are still signs. 1 month after the memorial was completed, a photographer capturing early morning fog near the site took a picture of the clearing. In the final photo, after adjusting the light balance, 10 faint silhouettes could be seen standing in a mist, just beyond the tree line. Each wore what looked like a bomber jacket. Each stood in silence, facing the memorial. The photo was never published widely. The photographer said it didn't feel right to use it for clicks or fame. He simply left a printed copy at the base of the monument and walked away. In a war filled with millions of dead and endless stories of tragedy, it's easy to forget just one crew, one plane, one mission that ended too soon. But Osterfeld has not forgotten. Each year now, on the night of September 8th, the village holds a small candlelight vigil near the forest. No speeches, no press, just candles placed in a circle around the old fuselage plate, glowing softly against the glass. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, people say they can hear something in the distance. Not an engine, not a radio, a song, a quiet harmony floating through the air like a lullaby carried by ghosts, echoing from the sky. And those who hear it say the same thing. It doesn't feel scary. It feels like a goodbye. Some missions never end, and some stories refuse to fade into history. If you felt the chill of this tale, there's more waiting in the shadows of wartime memory. Subscribe to Wartime Shadows and join us again when the fog rolls in and the past comes knocking. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and listen closely. Asterisk. The skies might still be speaking.